Meet your new go-to for a fresh and inclusive approach to health.
Wellness Rebranded is the pod where a dietitian, a personal trainer, and a mental health therapist combine perspectives to help you redesign your relationship with food, fitness, and your feelings.
Whether we're serving up juicy stories, breaking down the latest research, or dropping practical tips, we'll leave you informed, inspired, and ready to take health-promoting action.
We get you because we are you.
We've joined forces because we know that health isn't one-dimensional, and neither are you.
Tune in for real talk that cuts through the wellness and diet culture hype. Stay for the laughs, the insights, and the feel-good vibes. Hey, it's Elizabeth. I want to tell you about a free 3-day challenge I'm hosting called Why Am I Eating This? If you struggle with mindless or emotional eating, or you find yourself wondering why you're eating, even when you know you're not hungry or that the things you're choosing are going to make you feel terrible, this free day 3 challenge is for you. Over the course of 3 days, I'm going to show you the steps to distinguish between physical and emotional hunger. I'm going to show you how you can uncover hidden triggers behind your eating and help you grow your self-awareness so that you can shift deeply rooted eating patterns that no longer serve you and learn to eat with greater intention and care. The challenge is free. It will last for 3 days. You can sign up at the link in the show notes. It kicks off October 14th. Welcome back to another episode of Wellness Rebranded. We are super excited to have a really special guest here. Her name is Charlotte Markey. She is a PhD and a body image scientist. She studied body image and eating behaviors for nearly 3 decades. She's passionate about understanding how to help people have a healthy relationship with food and their body. Charlotte is a psychology professor at Rutgers University and a research scientist who has published over 100 scholarly articles and chapters about health issues. Dr. Markey is also an experienced book author, having most recently published the Body Image Book series, which includes the Body Image Book for Girls in 2020, the Body Image Book for Boys in 2022, and Adultish, the Body Image Book for Life in 2024. She also recently co-edited the 3-volume Encyclopedia of Mental Health. She writes regularly for news outlets such as Psychology Today and is often interviewed for TV, news articles, and podcasts, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and NBC. She'll tell you more about where we can find her as we get into the episode, but Charlotte, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited too.
Yeah, and I really just want to start off by asking you, how did you become a body image scientist? What led you to that?
I know people ask that a lot, and sometimes I can't help but think, well, I'm a woman living in this world that you're all living in. So that's part of the answer. Of course, there's more to it than that. And I did grow up as a ballet dancer and with a lot of body scrutiny in that world in the 1980s. And so I think that was part of it. You know, I just always felt like this pressure and concern about bodily appearance issues. And it took me a while to figure out that that was really maladaptive and there was another way to live, essentially. And that's what led me, I think, to psychology and ultimately this field.
Yeah, awesome. Well, your research is so needed. And I have read your most recent book, Adultish. It is wonderful. I love all of the personal stories in there. It's so comprehensive. It's definitely a resource that I know I'll be referring people to over and over again in my work. But how about if we just start off talking about kind of what is body image and how do you know if yours maybe needs some healing?
I define body image really broadly. So a lot of researchers will say body image is how you think and feel about your body. But I really think that there's much more to it and that kind of simplifies it to make it seem much more superficial than it really is, because it's not just about appearance, but really it's part of your identity. It's how you feel about yourself. And it's also how comfortable you are just sort of in your own skin. And I think that if you're spending a lot of mental energy feeling worried about your, not just your appearance, but sort of your interactions with others, your mental health more broadly, your health related behaviors like eating and activity, then maybe you need a little body image healing.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Markey, you were mentioning maladaptive. How could you give some examples of what would that look like? Because sometimes we're so immersed in it that we don't even recognize, right? What maladaptive might mean.
Well, I think in terms of what is and isn't maladaptive, I don't know if there's a hard line, and I think it can vary from person to person, but I think it has to do with how much time you're spending on worrying about these issues, right? It's normal and somewhat natural, I think, to care somewhat about our appearance or how we're perceived by others. But if you're really so invested in these issues that it detracts from your relationships, let's say, right? Or you don't want to go out and eat with friends because you're worried about what the food offerings are going to be. Or you don't want to spend time with your family because you feel like you need to go to the gym, right? Like when it starts to interfere with other facets of your life, then I would say for most people, that means we've hit maladaptive.
Or I'm even thinking when it's causing distress or psychological suffering, you thinking about how you look or how you should look, and is that preoccupation or with it, it's not a way anybody wants to live, I would think.
Exactly, right? If you are struggling psychologically, then you deserve help and support. And that
Hmm.
can be in terms of body image or in terms of any mental health issue, right? I mean,
Hmm.
I think these definitions we always come back to are you experiencing distress? Is it impacting other domains of your life? And if so, then everyone deserves help and support in those circumstances.
I see here, I know that you wrote books for tweens and teens and young adults about body image. And I would love for you to share a little more about that, but also ask you. I work in the emergency room of a hospital as a mental health clinician, and I've seen throughout the years the stress and distress that is around our teenagers with this topic specifically. And I have a teenager myself at home, and I mean, it blows my mind in a way how much of this is happening in the schools. Did that play a role on you writing these books? I mean, have you
Well,
seen these as well?
I have two of my own teenagers, so I am very much immersed in the world of teenagers, although they're, I guess, technically about adults at this point. And I also, have taught at a university ever since I essentially left being a university student. So I've been around young people and I've seen the stress and the pressure that they feel. And of course, that's influenced on my desire to want to help young people not be struggling. And I've done some clinical work on a trauma floor as well. And I don't typically see these patients there, but you do sometimes, right? And I run support groups for eating disorder patients. And, just the extent to which body image concerns can then become other mental health concerns, right? They're really correlated with depression, anxiety, substance use disorders, and of course, eating disorders. And so we're not, like I said, just talking about something that's superficial. We're not just talking about people who are dissatisfied with their hair. We're talking about people who are really suffering. And sometimes that has really traumatic consequences.
One thing that I thought was really interesting when I was reading your book, Adultish, Charlotte, is how you talked about thinking about kind of adolescents or young adults and social media and body image. How the research shows it's not actually necessarily the number of platforms or how much time they're spending on them, but rather the type of content and their intent on being there. And I think that that's something that probably has broader applications, not just for this age group, but for anyone. So can you talk about that some?
Yeah, so this description of the research is based on some of the work I've done even in my own lab at Rutgers University. And I was really interested in trying to dig in a little bit more because the research in this area is really grown in the last few years, but for many years it just felt kind of slow. Like the only studies I saw were about Facebook, and I knew just from living in my home that like kids weren't even on Facebook. So I was like, come on, what's going on for real? What are these kids doing on social media? Because I also have seen how young kids, if they're sharing pictures of like their pets, I mean, that's not going to negatively impact body image, right? Like that's just connecting with other kids. And during the pandemic in particular, some of those connections were really important for young people. And a lot of us, I think, went much more hands off in terms of parenting social media for a few years there because it was a lifeline for young people who were stuck at home way too much. And, the research so far, I think, supports some of my intuitions about this just from being a parent. And, we find that if young people are following like beauty tutorials and celebrity culture and fitness influencers, that really is qualitatively different in terms of the body image impact than it's just, messaging with friends.
Yeah, so a takeaway for everyone then thinking about their social media usage, what would you tell people?
I would say be careful how you use it. I do think Pandora's box is open. So I think some of the discussion about making it go away may be somewhat impractical. But I do think that media literacy should really be a public health priority when we're talking about young people. If young people are getting health information predominantly from TikTok, then we need to teach young people when you're on TikTok, how do you decipher what is quote unquote good information versus wellness information that has no evidentiary basis.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's so much to be said for like carefully curating your social media feed, and things that like make you don't feel good about yourself or about whatever, like maybe unfollow some of those or look at it a little bit less. And then things that are really uplifting or just fun entertainment, like skew towards that a little bit more.
Absolutely. And I'm sure all of our social media feeds look pretty mental health compatible, right? Like this is what we do and we're invested in this and that's like kind of what we follow. And I'm sure to some extent I can't even imagine what it really looks like if you're a very young, insecure person looking for like beauty and mental health advice and fall down the rabbit hole of social media. But I think given our experience, we know that social media doesn't have to be a negative place.
Mm-hmm. I think that all the time. I feel like my social media is so insular and protected from toxic diet culture and some of those negative influences that a lot of times people, I tend to work with, and we have a lot of listeners who are women in midlife. And I feel like around that perimenopause, menopause is like another super toxic hotspot for diet culture and negativity and comparison and, body ideals on social media. And sometimes I'm like, maybe I need to go follow some of that so I know what people are seeing, but I just can't bring myself to do it.
I know. Or, what I often tell parents, if you are allowing your kid to become social media users, start by first doing some monitoring, right? Where you once a week say, hey, I just want you to show me for a few weeks kind of what you have going on here. And sit down for 20 minutes and just ask questions. Try really hard not to be judgmental, but ask questions to encourage some critical thinking. How does that make you feel? Why are you following that person? Do you think that this is a good source of information? And just sort of get them thinking so that they can develop their own critical thinking skills. And it's entirely possible that some adults need that coaching too. So maybe that's what you need to do. Don't start following it so you have to see it, but sit down with your clients and say, what are you seeing? Are you sure you shouldn't unfollow that?
I loved your example because in the book where you talked about that study from Fiji related to the body ideals, because I think it happens in social media, it happens in real life, like off social media too. But I think sometimes we just don't realize, like, A, how bombarded we are with those body ideals, and then B, how significant they are in shaping and informing how we feel about our bodies. And I often give people the example of being on a desert island, but you actually studied like that in real life. So I would love to get you to like share about that, or you cited a study in real life.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wish I had done that study in real life, not just because I would have loved to go to Fiji, but right. So, this is a very, very classic study by Ann Becker, who was at Harvard at the time, I believe. She's a sociologist, and she actually studied the introduction of television in Fiji and how that changed beauty ideals and how that led, well, we can't really say led because it was a field study. So it's essentially correlational research, but I think it's pretty damning in terms of the media influence, because if that's the primary change that was introduced to the culture, and then we see an uptick, a noticeable uptick in eating disorders and concerns about body image, then, the blame has been placed on television, essentially. That's sort of the conclusion people come to from that research.
And it's tricky with adolescents because I feel that, I mean, I don't think they have developed that discernment of what's really, not helping and what is it. I mean, when they see somebody on TikTok with all these followers and they have this, what it looks like the great life, and, it is expected and normal also for adolescents to be the age where they, question their image and they're in that lookout for, who am I? How do I look like? How do I want to look like? So all that is like the perfect storm sometimes for them to consume stuff that is not. But also, Dr. Markey, we're talking about social media, but I'm also thinking about the impact that we as parents can have on that as well. Like, even as a mental health therapist, I found myself before, I realized, and I don't do it anymore, but not too long ago, I found myself in front of a mirror and saying, oh my goodness, I'm fat. I don't like my body, in front of my soon to be a teenager. And I realized how that has an impact to how we talk to ourselves in front of our kids, or even how we refer to other people. Let's say, like, hey, let's go talk to that lady, or look at her, she looks this and that, and then start sending the message that the value other human beings have to do with their image or their appearance. So what would you say about that? How, as parents, can we also fight the battle, right?
It's tough because all of this is so normalized, right? Commenting on our body and other people's bodies is incredibly just normal. And in fact, a way, especially women often connect with one another, right? We call it fat talk, by like degrading ourselves in front of our friends. That's been, for many people growing up, a source of connection. And, I had a similar experience, Maria, when my children were young, and I thought, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore. I just can never do this again. I never want them to hear me disparage myself, right? And we're not socialized to say positive things about ourselves. Like, I think I look really great in this outfit today. And that still will feel very uncomfortable for me. But occasionally I do try to do it because I hope to believe it, And I also want my kids to feel like you can look at yourself and see the good, right? To pick out what you like. Why are we all so brainwashed into thinking whenever we view ourselves physically, we're supposed to be looking for what we don't like and how we can fix that? What if instead young people grew up more thinking, I have great hair, off to school I go, right? Like, it's okay. It's okay to like yourself. And yet most of us weren't socialized believing that. And we have a real opportunity, I think, with the next generation to start to change the narrative, to change how the dialogue plays out. And kids are very sensitive to this from a young age, we know, right? That they like young kids. Social cognitive development is such that even in the preschool and early elementary years, they start to categorize people. That's how they make sense of their world. And that categorization is often very simplistic. There's not a lot of nuance because that's how our brains work. And we want to really try to push back against that, right? That it's not like you're good or bad or fat or thin or tall or short, right? But that people are more complex and that you don't need to put people in these boxes. And you certainly shouldn't value people based on these categories.
I imagine it works the other way too, right? Like there's the role modeling of a child hearing a parent maybe even disparaging their own body. Unfortunately, some children also have a parent who, or some other adult who disparages their body as well. And hopefully we can change that. but also even just kids who get lots of compliments and praise about their appearance, right? I would imagine that that also creates a hyper focus on appearance as who you are and what you're valued for.
Yeah, I do think we need to be careful not to focus in too much on appearance in general. I think it's really difficult because appearance is what we see, right? So if you see someone and you notice their shirt or their hair, then you're often drawn to say something about that. And those can be nice pleasantries we exchange with people. So, some body image researchers take a very hard line about this and say, just do not comment, right? And I never really take quite that hard of a line because I think that that also can be a little bit unnatural. You want to make sure that you're complimenting, especially young people, on things like their sense of humor, their ability to be good friends, right? Their study habits, other things that you value. But there also are circumstances where, like when my kids went to prom, like if I didn't say you look great, they would assume I thought they didn't look great, right? Like there are circumstances culturally where I think if you don't say something, the absence of positive feedback is kind of a negative statement too. So it's very tricky, I guess because I've been a psychologist for my adult life, right? I just see a lot of nuance in all of this, and it's just tricky stuff. But so it keeps me, occupied with it and studying it for years and years now.
This is actually really interesting to me because I have a 4-year-old and he has like the cutest hair ever that's ever existed. It's these little black ringlet curls. And my husband is completely bald and went bald like in his late 20s. And the first thing people say to my son when they meet him is, "Oh my gosh, I love your curls," because it's cute, right? But I'm like, so in 20 years, when the curls aren't there, like is he gonna be okay? Like, I mean, there's no choice, right? There's nothing you can really do to stop balding that I know of, but I feel like that's something that's kind of come up for me, like, oh my gosh, like then what are we gonna say to you?
Well, I mean, what I do know of balding is it's on the maternal gene, so you're not bald, so he probably he probably
Oh.
won't he probably won't be bald. Okay, I know that's beside the point, but I couldn't help but mention it if it eases your mind at all. And
Look,
I
I
do
learned
this.
more than one thing today.
I say this to my son too. My son has a huge head of hair, and his dad is pretty much bald, and I'm always like, so, one, he may not be bald, but two, what's wrong with your son liking his hair? Right?
Yeah,
Like maybe
nothing.
that's okay. Maybe
Yeah.
that's okay. And as long as then as a parent and as adults in his orbit, you're also teaching them that he's an amazing kid because he's kind, he's funny, he's cooperative, he's good at math. Like then he doesn't have to rely on his curls as like his ticket through the rest of his life.
Right.
But I think most of us were raised by parents with a very different orientation where there was this concern that like we would have big egos if they said anything positive to us ever. And that didn't play out very well. So
Yeah,
I
for
don't think we
sure.
have to follow that model.
So can I ask you a sort of practical question, especially knowing that you have teenagers? I have 3 kids. They're age, like 18 to 22. And I know it happens in my home all the time when they have their friends over, both boys and girls, which is interesting. The conversation is different with the boys. With the boys, it's like often they're not necessarily, well, sometimes they are talking about things they don't like about their bodies, like I'm too skinny or whatever. Often I feel like it's more the opposite of like just discussion around wanting to bulk up or, whatever the phrases boys use. When the girls are in the house, often I'll hear them saying things like, "Oh, I hate that picture. I look so fat in it," or I really hate this part of my body. I look so ugly today. So I'm just curious, when you have groups of kids in your home, as I'm sure you often do, and you hear conversations like this, when you choose to step in, how do you do it as a body image researcher? What would you say if you were a parent in a room where kids are having those kinds of conversations?
Well, I think sometimes when you're not sure what to say, and Maria knows this as the psychologist here too, probably the easiest thing to do is to ask a question. right? And so you can interject yourself by saying, well, why do you say that? Why would you say that? Or why do you think that? Or I'm not sure what you mean, or explain that to me, right? So get them again working on developing their own critical skills. Are they parroting what someone else has said or what they think is appropriate to say because it is normalized in our culture to disparage ourselves? And I think sometimes that can be more compelling because if we just say, like, oh, no, that's not true, that almost feels kind of trite, right? Especially if you're dealing with an 18-year-old, they're just gonna be like, oh, well, you're like my mom or my friend's mom. Of course, that's what you think, right? And so we're not always even like a really great messenger to try to convince them because they either think we're biased because of our personal relationship or we're just out of touch because we're old. So I think sometimes questions are a good thing. Like, why do you guys say that? Or why do you think, can you think of maybe something else to focus on?
I was wondering too about asking, I wonder what you would think about asking the question of like, well, okay, I hear you. What are some things you do like about yourself?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like getting them to focus on it a little bit differently.
Yeah. I think that's great if you can engage them in that way, because again, why can't we all start looking at what we like more than just what we dislike?
So, Dr. Markey, kind of switching gears a little bit, this is a topic that's fascinating to me because I work in fitness. And as you know, fitness is like, or can be a hotbed of diet culture and body image, trickiness. And so I do see a lot of backlash against like body positivity, against health at any size, against things like that. Can you kind of talk to us about like what the research is saying about that or your take on the backlash against it?
I mean, there's different, causes of the backlash. So one piece of discussion that comes up a lot is, body positivity is too hard, so I can't engage with that, right? Like I can't feel positive. Look at all of these standards that confront me every day. How do you expect me to feel positive about myself? And sometimes people then talk about body neutrality and a focus on acceptance as one way to sort of cope with that feeling of like this is an insurmountable problem. I usually say as a psychologist that if anything, I like to see that as a starting point, right? Like acceptance and feeling more neutral and feeling less distress is a great starting point. But ultimately, I do want people to experience some joy in their bodies, some positivity. The other piece of backlash is when people say, like, acceptance or body positivity means accepting yourself at whatever size you are, and is there a health concern piece there that isn't being addressed? And I think what the research says about that is that, repeated dieting, disordered eating, which very often accompanies dieting, compulsive exercise, all of that is much, much less healthy, much, much more damaging, both psychologically and physically, than it is being a person in a larger body. So I think that there's really good reason to focus on cultivating a positive body image and to be accepting of size diversity and to work on, as I'm sure you do in your practice, people feeling accepting and good in their bodies, and not just because of how they look, but because of how they function and how they make them feel and what they allow them to do.
Totally. This is like my whole platform.
I don't envy you. I think that you probably work in the trickiest space of all of us because, I love being active myself, but I think there's so much room for acceptable compulsion in exercise.
Yeah.
So like finding that, like middle ground in terms of doing what feels good and what's good for you mentally and physically and not overdoing it, but still maybe doing some of it is, I think, just so hard for people.
Interestingly, for me, I feel like the most backlash I see is from other fit pros. It's not the people. The people are usually like, oh, okay, you're a personal trainer, you're knowledgeable, you're telling me this. Okay, that's what I'll
Yeah.
do. But the other fit pros are like, wait, we can't have size diversity. Everyone must be thin. You know, if you're not thin, you're unhealthy. And it's this like spiral of like, well, they can't have good body image because they're not thin, when it's the
Yeah,
complete opposite of that, right?
it's the complete opposite of that because we're not all meant to be thin. Like genetically, most of us are
Tell me
not.
about it.
Yeah, genetically, most of us are not, predetermined, predestined to be there. And so then for a lot of people, that means fighting their biology in a way that is frankly a losing battle, right? I mean, yes, some people, if they really want to be thin, they can engage in disordered eating, but that could literally kill them. So,
Yeah,
that's not healthier.
Yeah.
right.
How do you address the topic? I feel like it comes up, I hear it all the time, that sort of accepting your body is akin to sort of giving up or letting yourself go.
I mean, I think this is also part of the problematic sort of diet culture messaging that's out there, right? That like you have to keep punishing yourself in order to succeed in whatever it is in life. And that's why I have a whole chapter in Adultish on like self-care and self-compassion. And a lot of that content really resonates with me because I do think it's hard. And if you're a high achieving person, it's really hard to know when to slow down, when to take a break, when to just say, no, acceptance is better here, that this is not healthy, right? It goes back to what we said early in the discussion about if this is taking up a lot of your mental space and it's distressing, it's not healthy. So we need to have, I think, fuller lives that don't just involve trying to reach these ideals, which are not meant for like us mere mortals, right? Like the sort of Kardashian ideals, none of us are meant to achieve. And they're just really oppressive, frankly, because if we're going to try to achieve them, we're going to have to spend most of our lives engaged in these practices and, I mean, surgeries, honestly, right? And behaviors. So I don't want that to be my whole job in life. I think most of us want to have lives that involve relationships and friends and things that are like not parent centric.
Dr. Markey, what I know you've done a lot of work, valuable work, and I would love for our listeners to know about your books, what they're about. Could you tell us a little bit about what other books and your books are there so they can find them?
Of course. So if you go to I have a book webpage that has all the books. It's just thebodyimagebook.com. So all the body image books are there. And that links to like my social media and stuff too. So you can find me on other platforms through that. And then in the books, I also try to always list resources. So at the end of every chapter, there's resources about that topic that I think will be helpful to people. And, I think it's really encouraging. I feel like in the last decade, there's a ton of good books. I feel like I'm in really amazing company that there are more and more books all the time to help people approach these issues and concerns in terms of nutrition, in terms of fitness, in terms of mental health more generally. So if you're looking for resources, please do check out my books, but check out the other books I recommend also, because I think the more we learn, the more we understand about these topics, the more we can appreciate how dysfunctional the cultural messaging is and how we really need to shift the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. What a great way to wrap up, and directing people to your books. You've written several, and it sounds like you also, the other books you recommend are at that body image book website as well.
They're not on the website. You have to
Okay.
go into the book. That's just lack
Okay.
of organization on my part. It's not
Got
a strategy to make you buy the book. It's
Yeah,
just lack
okay.
of organization.
Brilliant strategy, though.
I know. Now I'm wondering if I should make a resource list. No, but yeah, if people sometimes message me and they're like, "Listen, I need something for a different age or different gender or whatever," I'm always respond to those messages because
Yeah. Well, you certainly have incredible resources. I love the book. Like I said, I will definitely be recommending it. I unfortunately haven't read your other ones, so I'm going to have to check those out. But thank you so much for coming on. I personally know that I could ask you dozens more questions and talk to you for much longer. You're a wealth of information and knowledge and insight, and we really, really appreciate you coming on. Where can people find you?
Again, you can just go to thebodyimagebook.com. You can go to charlottemarkey.com. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, occasionally Facebook, occasionally Twitter. I'm easy to find.
And we'll drop it on the show notes for our listeners. Just click there to get in contact with Dr. Markey. But yes, thank you so much. This information is, I wish we could share this, more often and in different platforms. Is really valuable information. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, this is so much fun. I wish we had a whole nother hour or two, but at some point we'd bore your listeners, I guess. So
we'll just have to have you back.
Yeah.
I would love that. I'm revising the body image book for girls right now for an update because it's been about almost 5 years since I wrote that. So there are some parts of that I'm super excited to update. So I might hit you up when that comes out in a year.
Definitely, please
hit us up. Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah.
I feel like body image is one of the most important things we talk about because it affects all the other things. So I could talk about this forever.
Agree. Yeah. I mean, that's why I love it. Even when it feels stressful or hard, I'm like, oh, there's just so much more to think about and talk about, and always something weird going on culturally to address. So
sadly,
I know. It's like just when you think it's getting better, there's
welcome to the world.
Right.
There's always something weird going on here.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much again. And for our listeners, if you like this episode, don't forget to download, share with your friends, with everyone, such valuable information. Please follow us on Instagram at Wellness Rebranded. And we will see you here, same place, same time on Wellness Rebranded podcast. Until then. Thank you for listening. If you want to connect with me outside of this podcast, you can find me on Instagram at coaching_therapist.
I'm Elizabeth. You can find me at Elizabeth Harris Nutrition or in my Facebook group, Health and Healing with Intuitive Eating.
And I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Tara DeLeon Fitness. Guys, if you loved this episode or any of our other episodes, we would love it if you would leave us a review on Apple Podcast. It really, really helps us get the non-diet word out to the rest of the world. So please leave us a review.
Yes, thank you.